Welcome back to the Corporate Gossip Podcast, and a special welcome to all of our new listeners. We are so excited to snark with you. If you're new to the podcast, I posted a guide to our back catalog on Instagram, so you want to check that out. And now my favorite thing, thanking all the people who bought us coffees. And guys, this week is a special thanks to you because I dipped into the coffee fund yesterday, big time. I went at the butt crack of dawn to the Southern District of New York Federal Court in downtown Manhattan so I could be in the courtroom as Sam Bankman-Fried took the stand at his criminal fraud trial. I have so many notes, and if you guys follow me on Instagram, I posted a bunch of updates there, but you can hear more about that on next week's episode. But I physically would not have been able to wake up at that early hour without the following people who bought us coffees this week: Rachel, Julia Z, and old friend of the pod, Nico. Thank you all so much. If you want to support the podcast and get a shout out in the show, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link in the show notes. Halloween is finally here. Crispy, fallen leaves crunch under little costumed feet as children race between houses. Neighbors yelp as disembodied hands emerge from candy bowls, and pillowcases, heavy with chocolate, drag across the sidewalks. But if you look in the distance, just beyond the cul-de-sac, behind the rotted wooden fence, illuminated by the orange haze of an autumn moon, you'll find one of the most haunted graveyards in America. They say the spirits of those buried here are in purgatory and still possess the living. No, I'm serious. Come on, let's check it out. Here lies Jack Welch, legend of layoffs, overlord of offshoring, sovereign of stock buybacks, born in Salem, 1935. Oh, look at this one. Let me dust it off. Here lies David Koch, whose whole life was one sick joke, and thanks to him, we're all broke. This graveyard is filled with dead douchebags, and legend has it, every Halloween they emerge from their graves, possess living CEOs, and use them to take care of unfinished business. What's that?
Synergy's Rankin Yank Golden Parachute!
Oh my god, it's the freaking ghost of Jack Welch! And behind him, he's got an army of bitter billionaire banshees. Follow those ghosts! They went into that building. They just went up through the ceiling. Quick, the elevator! Hi, how's it going?
Welcome to Pacific Gas and Electric Headquarters. How may I help you?
Hi, listen, there's not much time. Are there any executives in the building?
Why, yes, there's a leadership meeting right behind these glass doors.
You have to get them out. There's a bunch of really decrepit, absolutely dim-witted demons on our tail, a real bunch of dopes, and they're going to try to possess PG&E executives and use them to plunder the company's resources for their own gain. There they are. They're headed for the conference room.
Oh, okay. One sec. Security, I'm gonna need an escort on floor 16. Hi, come back here.
Mr. Welch.
What are you doing here? I thought I put a curse on you and your podcast after you accused me of light accounting fraud.
Oh my god, you listen? Oh, sorry. Listen, Neutron Jack, you can't possess those executives. This isn't just any company. This is PG&E. They're a public utility that manages power lines going into 5 million homes in Northern California. If you haunt them like you did David Zaslav, they could put profit over safety and put the entire state of California in danger.
Oh, that sounds terrible. How much profit are you talking?
I don't know, billions? But come on! Have you been living under a rock? Prioritizing profit never works out. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of billions they make in salary and stock. Their strategy to get there, like cutting employees, eliminating maintenance work, and bribing regulators, it'll eventually catch up to them and literally explode in their face.
Billions? Say less.
We tried, but we couldn't save the PG&E executives from the ghost of Jack Welch. Oh well, the only thing we can do now is talk shit. This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast. PG&E. Go girl, give us nothing.
Speed.
Welcome back to Skilling Studios home of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA scorned Becca Platsky, here with my co-host and my brother,
data analytics playboy Adam Platsky.
Today, we're talking PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. It's Go Girl, Give Us Nothing. And don't forget, if you are wanting to follow on with the pictures that we're using, you can click on the Substack link in our show notes, or you can watch us on YouTube. And then you can see our first picture, Miss Kourtney Mary Kardashian, because she has a quote that I think just really encapsulates the vibe of the PG&E executives, which is,
I think it's like everyone understanding that we all have different priorities, and like working is just, it's not my top priority. It's never going to be.
I think this quote really captures the energy of PG&E leadership. They are relentlessly committed to not working. It's inspiring. You know, I want to be their level of flop. Their customers, their employees, government regulators are all saying, in the words of another Kardashian, get off your ass and work. But PG&E, they have fully embraced the type of quiet quitting that they blame us of.
You know, you would expect some of this malfeasance and lack of competency from maybe a public utility. But a privately held utility, you know, should have the leadership, and they're compensated so well. We should have some sort of respect for the customer.
For human lives, you would think, right? But I will say there is one person in the PG&E executive team who is working. Maybe two people. It's the general counsel and its communications department, because here are the issues that PG&E has faced over the past 20 years alone. Okay, this is since 2003. Since 2003, they filed for bankruptcy twice. They've churned through 6 CEOs. That doesn't even count the interim, of which I think there were 2 or 3 CEOs. Most of those CEOs were fired or resigned in a scandal. They started thousands of fires, which killed at least 113 people and burned, it's hard to get a good count, but potentially millions of acres of land and destroyed tens of thousands of homes. They were charged with 91 felony counts of manslaughter, of which they pled guilty to 84. They paid $2.6 billion in state and federal penalties. And you wouldn't want to be a shareholder in PG&E. If you bought $1,000 of PG&E stock in 2003, today, you want to guess how much you'd have? Mike, you want to give it a guess?
$150,000.
Were you not listening to the opening spiel?
$681. So just to do the math for you, you lost $319. Just for shits, just for comparison, if you bought $1,000 in Costco stock in 2003, today you'd have $17,840. I'd hope they'd be cutting CEO pay to the bare bones, because like clearly you're not getting that much value for your money. In the past 10 years, PG&E has paid their CEOs 10 years, $163 million in salary and golden parachutes for bringing negative shareholder value. I think that stock price decline was like something like 83% decline in stock price. Negative shareholder value. The boy math that these boards have to do to justify the CEO compensation is really something. When you saw the title of this episode, maybe you thought, it's going to be dry. This is boring. It's a utilities company. But I'm telling you guys, PG&E is one of the messiest companies I have ever researched in this podcast. You got bribery, corruption, judge shopping scandals, fire victims directly suing executives, a CEO pleading guilty to manslaughter, another CEO making a cringy corporate sing-along video on the eve of another guilty plea. It's so good. It's so good. So PG&E is established about 100 years ago when San Francisco Gas and San Francisco Electric merged. By the 1930s, they've got additional gas and electric companies across the Sierra Nevada. And today, PG&E services 5.2 million households in northern 2/3 of California. So basically from Bakersfield all the way up to northern Santa Barbara County, almost to the Oregon state line on the north and Nevada state line on the east. And the other thing you need to know about PG&E is that it is an investor-owned public utility. Basically, this means even though it's a public utility, it's a public service like a highway or train line, you can buy stock in the organization. So that means they have earnings calls, they've got quarterly earnings, they have profit goals. In many ways, they're more like a corporation than what you might consider a public utility.
Mm-hmm. And like, I think with utilities, this is an interesting point that we don't see in most episodes. The consumer doesn't necessarily have a choice. Up until recently, unless you had solar, you didn't have another choice to go anywhere else for your electric. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you're living within Northern or Central California, your only choice is PG&E.
Yeah.
Unless you don't want power. Or unless you have a huge hamster wheel.
And you yourself do the running.
Yeah. No, tiny elves do the running.
Oh, yeah. I should also add PG&E was the subject of iconic 90s cinematic masterpiece, Aaron Brockovich, based on a true story.
Oh, yeah. I read that. That was in my book. Yeah. Played by
Julia Roberts. Great movie.
I have never seen it.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
That's
I've never
such a
seen
good
it.
movie. It's a classic 90s movie.
Better than Con Air.
I haven't seen it.
It's probably like the woman's Con Air.
It's my Roman Empire.
Yeah.
All right, you ready to move on to the next piece of corporate gossip?
Bring it.
Corporate gossip number 1 is, you guys need to stop talking about Enron, said no one ever. Guys, it wouldn't be a corporate gossip episode if we didn't talk about Enron. Because these fuckers show up everywhere. Actually, Enron is my Roman Empire. I honestly, in my regular life, I feel like I probably think about Enron once a week. How often do you think about Enron?
Enron, not so much, but I probably think about Amazon daily. Not because I'm ordering, just thinking about running errands on my own and sticking it to Amazon.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
So this shitstorm can really be traced back to AB 1890. You know it. You love it. No, I'm kidding. AB 1890 is the Electric Utility Industry Restructuring Act. That's the bill California passed in 1996 to deregulate the electricity market. We're coming out of the Reagan years. We're in the 90s boom. And we know the truth of all truths, which is the free market will set you free. Let's have it work its magic, baby. We don't need a monopoly. Let these electricity companies do what they do best. You know, compete with one another, increase the standards of service.
Supply and demand,
baby. Consumers are going to benefit from lower prices due to increased competition.
And the companies, right, they can be trusted to act in the consumer's best interest.
Absolutely. You know, cut and paste Reaganomics bullshit. It's just... So here's the thing. When you hear deregulation, you think, okay, simple, right? Supply and demand. But there's 2 problems. Number 1, the new electricity market was actually really complex. There's tons of loopholes. There's weird rules. And then there's 2 agencies that are in charge of overseeing these new markets. And you know what? It's great when you split responsibility for oversight, because they certainly can't just start pointing at one another and saying, you missed it. No, you missed it. And not only that, they're completely understaffed. They're totally outmatched by these power companies. So they can't really regulate effectively. Unrestrained by regulation, these energy companies just went hog wild. Guys, that wasn't from a soundboard. That came from my co-host's face hole. So when supply was low and demand was high, they'd price gouge the shit out of their customers. One economist said that the degree to which the market can be manipulated was unlimited. So the company who took the most advantage of this messy energy trading market, Enron, baby. They were, after all, the smartest guys in the room. They devised a system to take advantage of this really complex, partially deregulated market. Basically, they moved power around to make it look like there was less power than there was. And then they overcharged their customers, including PG&E. And ultimately, this is what causes the energy crisis in California in 2001. So ultimately, at the end of the story, about a year later, Enron went bankrupt. And as we know, many people went to jail. For PG&E, the increased price that they had to pay for electricity during this time caused them to declare bankruptcy for the first time in 2001. So I mentioned the executives here are really the ones to blame. And so from this point in the story on, I'm going to tell this story CEO by CEO, because these fumbling executives are, they're going to do a lot for you guys. They're going to cure your imposter syndrome. If you don't come out of this episode feeling more confident in your leadership abilities, then write me a note because you're going to feel good about yourself after this. All right, you ready for our first CEO? Corporate gossip number 2 is Peter Darabee is possessed by the ghost of Jack Welch and then gets scammed by Accenture. This is a wonderful article by the Wall Street Journal where a lot of this information comes from, called PG&E Wired to Fail. So PG&E comes out of bankruptcy, their first bankruptcy, in April of 2004. They pay $10.2 billion to their creditors. And as part of the reorganization, PG&E's 5 million electricity customers will have to pay above market prices for several years so they can cancel the debt. Obviously, Enron couldn't compensate any of these customers, so they had to hold the bag themselves. So obviously, the next step after a scandal like this, you need a new CEO. So we've got Peter Darabee. He's like right out of central casting in terms of like the typical aughts CEO. He's a former Goldman guy. He went to Dartmouth. He's always talking in management speak. He loves Jack Welch. He goes to New York City to meet with investors and he says, guys, I'm going to modernize this company. I'm going to grow share price and I'm going to reinstate dividends.
Woo! Woo! Woo!
No, nothing here about safety. Nothing here about reliable electricity for our customers. We're taking that to the bank. So first step, clean house. 40 executives shit-canned. 8,000 employees terminated, which, okay, in terms of the executives, that's pretty normal for the new CEO to get a new leadership team in. But the problem was, in terms of those 8,000 employees who were terminated, he replaced a lot of people with deep knowledge of gas and electricity in the Northern California area with Wall Street Chads and Brads. So rather than being like, what do you know about electricity? They were like, let me ask you this, Brad. How many ping pong balls could fit in this room? I like the way you think about things. And it helps that you're a white male with a branded vest on. But he considered them, this is a quote, more advanced than the people who worked at PG&E prior. Okay, so after layoffs, let me go back in my CEO playbook. My boss boy playbooks, number did layoffs. Number 2 is hire consultants. We need to implement a PG&E transformation, business transformation. And then PG&E is teeming with consultants from Accenture. Ironically, the same firm that spun out of the Enron collapse. They were the former Arthur Andersen consultants who now became Accenture and are like spilling forth from the doors at the PG&E headquarters. According to the Wall Street Journal, the recommendations from Accenture, I mean, you could guess these if you've listened to our podcast for long enough, especially after our last episode on McKinsey. So the first was turn up the dial. I wish I could see these PowerPoint slides, by the way. So the first is turn up the dial, outsource jobs, and rely on contractors for pipeline construction and maintenance. Then Accenture's like, modernize. I got it. New software. Doesn't work.
Data.
It's somewhere. It's in here somewhere. But the problem is software didn't work. It was overly complex. The software would like randomly delete work orders. And the union electricians are like, this is untenable.
I think I have a moment too here as a data analytics playboy. I can tell you that modernizing 100-plus-year-old company is very difficult when everything is held on paper records.
And this guy's trying to do it in like what, 4 or 5 years?
5-year plan.
5-year plan. Here's another brain buster by Accenture. Let's give supervisors incentives for the fewer gas leaks they report. So the less gas leaks you report, the more we're going to pay you. What do the supervisors do? They don't report leaks. This exacerbated an already hairy situation because the real maintenance work that's out there is stacking up, but nobody's reporting it. Why would you? All told, Darabee wasted $300 million on Accenture. But he did get a 10% refund because he complained.
Rebate, baby. Rebates.
Normalize wasting $270 million on consultants. By 2010, Darabee is just real deep in doo-doo. Everybody's pissed at him. Shareholders, employees, unions, and we are about to see unintended, though not unforeseen, consequences of his relentless cost-cutting in San Bruno, California. So this is September 9th, 2010, around dinner time. A PG&E natural gas pipeline underneath San Bruno, which is, I think, right outside of San Francisco.
San Bruno? Yeah.
This pipeline ruptures, which allowed a torrent of gas to whoosh from the pipe and ignite an inferno. I mean, you see pictures of this?
Oh yeah, crater.
It's unreal. It's a fireball. 38 homes destroyed, 60 injured.
A 3,000-pound piece of pipe flew into the air like a soccer ball. They said
Insane. Yeah. Like a zit almost.
Yeah,
popping
like a nose zit
onto the mirror. So 38 homes destroyed, 60 injured, 4 with critical burns, 8 dead. 2 days later, their families, the victims and their families, gather in a church. Let's get answers from Darabee. But this motherfucker doesn't show up. This is unreal to me. And in all my research, I found no excuse for why he didn't show up. Instead, another executive shows up, Geisha Williams. You'll want to remember her for later in the story, but she answers questions. And the first question is, why did the pipeline explode? Her answer? We know our customers are extremely nervous, and who wouldn't be? Am I right, guys? Eventually, the truth would come out. Investigations uncovered that, shocker, the blast was caused by ineffective maintenance and lack of inspection of the pipeline. Next year, 2011, Peter Darabee is out. He gets a $34 million retirement package. Thank you, Peter. You wasted our money on Accenture consultants and killed 8 people. All right, you ready for the next CEO and the next piece of corporate gossip?
Who's next?
Corporate gossip number 3 is stay humble, Tony Early. So, PG&E board is like, we tried the Wall Street hotshot. That didn't work. Now we need what are we looking for? How about a rough and tumble, real rugged, real middle America? You know? You think that'll work? Meet Tony Early. He's a Notre Dame grad. He's a veteran of the Navy's nuclear submarine service. He's easygoing. He talks about servant leadership, which, unrelated. I'm so sick of that term. I feel like I've never met anyone who uses that term.
What is servant leadership?
It's like, I lead from behind and I think about my people first. I mean, in theory, it comes, I believe, from the military. It's like leaders eat last type of thing. But I'm just going to say anybody who I've heard use it in a TED Talk
an asshole.
Is toxic. That's my opinion. That is my opinion. So Tony Early is the first outsider to lead the company. Tony Early said early on in his tenure that he wants to go back to basics. And I think that meant, based on what I know about PG&E, basically doing nothing. Because that's what happens next. While the Northern California forests are dying, PG&E does the following to prevent a fire. Jack shit. So despite being told by the state to take all practicable measures, I think it's
practicable,
but I'm saying it practicable.
Put emphasis on a different.
Whatever. All right.
Do you want me to say it? You say it.
Okay.
Take all.
Yeah. Despite being told by the state to take all
practicable
measures, PG&E spent just $26.2 million on emergency drought response in 2014. So 2 years after he takes over, and $35 million next year. Just for reference, in 2016, by the time they get their spending up to where it needs to be, it's $254 million. So over $200 million more than what they're spending at the time. And by 2016, it's too late. There's 100 million dead trees in California ready to blaze. Do you want to do sound effects this episode?
Yeah, I'm going to do sound effects.
So one of the reasons they feel like they can get away with ignoring the demands of regulators is that they are engaging in a massive bribery and corruption scheme. So first, we've got $1 million fine levied by CPUC, which is the California Public Utilities Commission, for a judge shopping scandal. The CPUC charged PG&E's Vice President Brian Cherry with trying to secure a favorable judge in a rate-setting case stemming from the San Bruno pipeline explosion. A year after that, state regulators dropped the hammer, levying a record $1.6 billion in penalties against PG&E for 2,425 safety violations and demanding that the utility return $635 million to customers for pipeline improvements it never completed or mismanaged. And remember, this is after the customers of PG&E are overpaying for electricity to bring them out of bankruptcy. Now they're saying, actually, the money that you overpaid, we didn't even do anything with it. Here are the facts of the case. Okay, this is in terms of the criminal charges filed in 2014. Between 1997 and 2010, PG&E spent $39 million less than it told regulators it spent on pipeline operations and maintenance. Specifically, between 2008 and 2010, engineers had deferred numerous safety projects to meet budget targets. So they had several different options for testing these pipelines to make sure they didn't, explode and send fireballs 3,000 feet into the air. But instead, they chose the cheapest option, just looking at the pipeline.
The other thing is that I was trying to wrap my head around is with a visual inspection, right? The two smart pigs and water testing, hydro testing, both look at all parts of the pipeline, right? They're not digging out the entire pipe and inspecting it, because that's an expense, right? They're just like looking at a certain point of it and being like, oh, okay, like here's a small sample. This looks good.
Yeah, that is what they're doing. Yeah. As far as my research, that is what they're doing. All right, more facts of the case. Prior to San Bruno explosion, PG&E had 80 miles of pipeline. That's about the distance between Oakland and Sacramento of pipeline that experienced pressure thresholds over the legal limit for inspection. So even if they weren't inspecting, but if they were, they would have found 80 miles of pipeline that exceeded pressure limitations. So as a result of this trial, in the summer of 2016, a federal judge found PG&E guilty in the San Bruno blast. A federal judge ordered PG&E to pay $3 million fine, complete 10,000 hours of community service, and serve 5 years of probation. The $3 million fine is interesting because that relates to the criminal trial. And this type of prosecution against a corporate entity is weird and difficult because, like, it assumes a corporation is a person that can act with consciousness, but like a corporation and intent.
That's important to prove.
And I think it is hard, probably for better or worse, to identify like the individual responsible for negligence of these pipelines, because it was like very much a corporate culture. It would be the CEO, you would think, but I don't know.
We talked about before on this podcast, it would be great to be in a place where there's some legal tool where we can get CEOs
criminally responsible.
Yeah.
Well, because the thing that's frustrating is a lot of people come on my TikTok comments and are like, well, they make $16 million a year because they take so much risk. And to that I say, what risk? This CEO presided over a company that killed 8 people in one explosion as a direct result of their incompetency, and they didn't face any prison time. In fact, the guy who was the CEO at the time had a $30 million retirement package. So I don't really see a risk. To me, that feels very safe. So either pay them less or pay them more and have them be legally responsible for deaths that occur on their watch. I just don't feel like that's that crazy.
Yeah, I think about this when I've watched a lot of documentaries about mafia and stuff, and like one of the big things that came around is the RICO stuff, right? And RICO kind of changed the game. I think that could potentially happen with corporate entities, and they try and figure out some tool that can be developed to show almost like a crime organization, right?
Well, and this is as close in, we talk a lot about The Sopranos on this podcast, but I would say this organization between them and the regulators is as close to a organized, corrupt organization as I've seen between the regulators and the company.
Yeah, I would argue that Soprano ran a tighter ship.
Yeah. All right, so Tony Early, obviously, after that massive fine is levied, he's got to go. So for 5 years with his thumb up his butt as the leader of PG&E, Tony Early receives $55 million in salary plus a $10 million severance package.
Can I tell a Tony Early story?
Please.
So when Tony first became CEO of PG&E, he brought the leadership team to Crotonville, New York, Westchester, for a workshop with a company he looked up to fondly. What was the company, do you think?
GE?
Yeah, it was General Electric. So they were just learning from the best,
Right. God. I'm telling you guys, if you've listened to this enough episodes, if you have a leader that ever says, like, and they ask, oh, who do you look up to? And they say Jack Welch, run. I'm telling you, you need to run for the hills.
I think the equivalent would be like Elon Musk.
Well, that's going to come
like
up.
Elon Musk or...
Yeah, I would say if they look up to Elon Musk, which is ironic because just wait until the end of this episode. Do you want to take a break and then we'll come back and...
Yes, let's take a break.
All right. And we're back. Are you ready for the next piece of corporate gossip?
Yeah.
All right. Now...
How's your pee?
My pee was great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Where were you on the scale there?
Oh, needing to pee?
No, of hydration.
Oh, I didn't look.
No.
Yeah, I really wanted to get back to business. Corporate gossip number 4 is Geisha Williams is finally rewarded for her job as pain sponge after the San Bruno explosions and is crowned CEO. So you remember her? She was the woman who showed up when Peter Darabee was too wussy to stand in front of the victims of the San Bruno explosions at the church, and she came instead. So now it's her time. Okay, here we are again. It's 2017 and we need a CEO. We tried big fancy schmancy Wall Street boss boy. That didn't work. We tried Midwestern simpleton and that didn't work either. What's next? I got it. A lady boss. She's younger. She's bilingual. She'll be the first Latina to run a Fortune 500 company and she'll run directly off of our glass cliff. This is going to be great. Okay, so she's about to announce her first order of business. Let me guess. If I were her, I would think about increasing investment in pipeline maintenance, researching effective ways to prevent wildfires. Here's a headline from 5 days after she took over as CEO. Exclusive, sweeping PG&E layoffs include jobs being offshored to India. Believe it or not, here's the thing that I don't think a lot of CEOs know. Wildfires actually don't give a shit about how many jobs you've cut at your whittle company, okay? Because there was a series of fires that summer that burned 6,000 homes and killed 44 people. And then there was the Tubbs fire in October 2017, so the fall after, which killed 22 people and destroyed over 5,000 homes. And Geisha is feeling the pressure immediately. She's like, wait, I thought this was going to be fun. This sucks.
This was supposed to be easy.
Yeah.
This is not like Florida Power and Gas.
So because of a California constitutional provision, which is known as inverse condemnation, it basically lets residents and business owners seek compensation from utilities if their equipment damaged property. And the utility company has to pay regardless of the actual cause of the fire. Or, as Williams put it, we have to pay even if a utility has followed all the rules and, in essence, had not done anything wrong. Okay. Geisha Williams is doing small bean. She's getting in trouble, even though her company didn't do anything wrong, which, to be clear, they did do a lot of stuff wrong bigly. So PG&E, baby, you got to pay up. And like a knife to the kidney, which comes from this season of Sister Wives, if you're watching. Like a knife to... What? It's a great show.
No, I know. Who said that?
Cody.
Cody said it. Got it.
After all I've done to prevent forest fires, which is nothing, they have to suspend its dividend. Shares fall 13% on that announcement. But don't worry. That wasn't going to impact Geisha's salary. That year, her compensation increased from $4.6 million the year before to $8.56 in 2007, and then another raise in 2018 to $9.2 million. Wouldn't it be awesome if every year at my job I did worse and worse and I got paid more and more? So that seems especially egregious when you remember what happened in 2018. So the 2018 campfire killed 85 people, destroyed the town of Paradise. It was caused when a 97-year-old hook, a C hook that held up one of PG&E's live wire, snapped. This is all depicted in the documentary on Netflix called Fire in Paradise.
No, hold on.
I think it's Fire in Paradise.
Can I say something about that documentary?
Yeah.
Or documentary? Documentary. Okay. That film. Oh my God. So I watched it today and I recommended it to you, but then I didn't watch it myself. And it was on my list for a long time. It is some of the scariest footage I've ever seen in my life. I watched it with my girlfriend Lauren, and we both watched it during our lunch hour, and it was just like, it was really heavy. It was so heavy, so sad. It was the scariest. Think about the scariest environment imaginable. To quote Owen Wilson in Armageddon, it was the scariest environment imaginable. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen, the saddest thing I've ever seen. Dogs die, people die. It's so sad. It's
essentially follows the first 24 hours after the campfire started. So it starts with a call at 5:30 in the morning with the first spark, and then it follows a group of people, several different people in several different places in and around Paradise. And it is harrowing. It reminded me of what I think about when I think about hell.
Yeah, there's a point where one of the women who is a school teacher, she's evacuating the kids on the bus, and she said, and they're stuck in the fire, and she says, you know, at one point we just prayed that we would die of smoke inhalation. Getting to the point of saying, I don't want to burn alive. Best case scenario, I die of smoke inhalation. It's a different level of bringing yourself to demise that I can't even imagine of bringing myself to. That being said, I think a massive trigger warning goes out to anyone who is going to watch that one. Don't force anyone to watch it unless you feel like you can handle it and you want to watch it. It is extremely disturbing and scary and just everything. It's really tough to watch, and at the end of it you'll be thankful that it's only 40 minutes long, and it's just all the emotions for me.
The other thing that I mean the bravery of the first responders. Yeah,
that you know what's crazy is that everyone. I was just everyone. I didn't even think, I thought about the first responders, but I was just like, I can't even bring myself to put myself in that situation.
They were all so brave and strong to go through that. I mean,
quick thinking, I
can't imagine the trauma that they're still dealing with today.
And they said that the Paradise Fire really started the most damage was done within an hour. So between that 7 and 8 a.m. hour.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at the video and it's 8 a.m. and it is pitch black.
So you remember when Geisha Williams said that PG&E was following all the rules? Oh, she was crossing her fingers, by the way, behind her back. She had real Charles Koch energy when it came to rule following. And here's what investigators uncovered after the fire. So even before the fire, the company knew that 49 of the steel towers that carried the electrical line that failed needed to be replaced entirely before the fire. A 2017 internal presentation, PG&E estimated that its transmission towers were an average of 68 years old. The life expectancy of these towers was 65 years old, and the oldest steel towers were 108 years old. The part of PG&E's grid that included this line, called the Caribou-Palermo line, is so old that segments were considered candidates for the National Register of Historic Places. These are the lines they knew about. And remember, their data is such shit that for them to know about this is even shocking. Documents show that PG&E was unaware of the exact age of many of its transmission towers and wires. In that same presentation, the company identified risks because of a rapidly drying California forest. So they knew the fuel was there and the spark was there.
Do you know how, what the, I guess, for lack of a better term, wildfire equation is? How a wildfire starts? Okay. I don't think most people know, and I didn't know before reading this book. I don't know why I never looked it up while I was living in California, but essentially the equation is wildfire equals drought-suffering trees, high winds, and electrical wires.
Yeah. And the day of the campfire, you know, they open with a weatherman saying it's a gorgeous day, but it's going to be pretty windy. So that's risk, right? So what happened here, according to the investigators, is that executives put profit over safety. In the criminal trial, and thank God there was a criminal trial that would get underway a few years later, prosecutors said that the problem in PG&E's culture is that the people who are trying to do the right thing are not appreciated and rewarded. The people who get appreciated and rewarded are the people who come in under budget. It's disgusting. So this is interesting. The line that snapped and sparked the campfire, the Caribou Palermo line, PG&E used to give that line 3 scheduled inspections a year. But in the 1990s, PG&E started making cuts. And by the time of the campfire, the power line only got 1 inspection every 5 years and 1 so-called air patrol the other 4 years. When they did the air patrol inspection line, they literally would just fly over as fast as possible. And they had, I think they said like 4 seconds to look at each segment of the line.
So they've got linemen in helicopters, and then they fly over. And in the book I read, they said that in order to do this properly, the linemen need to go up in the towers and, you know, be within a couple feet.
And I'll also add that these folks who decided to go with the company line of not doing inspections got bonuses. That was confirmed by the company. So, you know, PG&E is like me when my check engine light comes on. If I ignore it, there's not really an issue. Here's a quote from Steve Bradley, whose 96-year-old grandmother, Colleen Riggs, was one of the 84 manslaughter victims. And I just want you to know, like, she died a horrible death. He says, it wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just simple negligence. It was an entire corporation failing for years and years and years and just rotting from the inside and not caring. So there's a hearing at the California Public Utilities Commission, and God, I love fiery hearings. These people came and they are ready to let it loose on the utility that's supposed to regulate PG&E. So here's some clips.
Jordan Davis for the record, speaking for myself. I just want to say that PG&E fucking sucks.
And it's a sign of intimidation by corporate powers that don't want to take action. When I was getting up here, somebody in a suit said, how many of these clowns do we have to listen to today? Well, how many clowns are we going to let kill? What would happen if I killed everyone in this room? I would go to jail for the rest of my life. If I killed one person in this room, I would go to jail for the rest of my life. Well, 88 people are dead at the hands of PG&E again.
Okay. Jackie Barshak, DSA San Francisco. You really need to listen to these people. I know that you all have an agenda, but you really need to listen to this community. Ratepayers will no longer pay for PG&E's long history of diverting revenue from public safety to fund executive bonuses, and your pockets also. Apologies, fines, changes in management. They don't work anymore. The PG&E has got to go.
I just want to say that PG&E fucking sucks. God, I love that. So in the end, PG&E was charged with 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I think the involuntary is really working there. The CEO will meet next, ultimately has to go to court and plead guilty. And they get a $3.5 million fine. If that sounds light, it's because it is. Investigators later found that the legislator and Governor Gavin Newsom acted to protect PG&E from the consequences of starting fires.
This is like a big smudge on Gavin Newsom's political career, right?
Oh my God. It's very disturbing.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of deals he's broken at the French Laundry.
Remember, this guy dated Kimberly Guilfoyle.
That's true. So here's what's in the agreement. The victims get a $12 billion trust, 50-50, cash and stock. And we know at this point the stock is fucking worthless. Prioritization of the payments goes to the insurance companies. The actual victims are left to fight for scraps, basically. That trust, which is highly dependent on the future of the company that fucked them over, that killed their family. Lawyers for the victims are doing lots of politicking so that they would settle quickly. Like, again, very similar to what we saw in Boeing. The argument from the victims' lawyers is like, half of something is better than half of nothing. The lawyers are obviously the big winners here. Bill Johnson, who's the next CEO we'll meet in a second, pleads guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter in the deadliest corporate crime in American history, which, I don't know, I guess because Boeing didn't end up going to criminal court, PG&E gets to hold that title, although there probably should be many more deadly corporate crimes. I mean, there are, but they haven't been prosecuted. Okay, so what about Geisha? She's fired in 2019, about 2 years after she took the role. In those 2 years alone, PG&E accrued more than $30 billion in potential wildfire liabilities, while the stock lost 85% of its value. Williams is paid $9 million a year on average and gets a $4.5 million golden parachute. And I know, guys, it's getting really hard to slog through this shit, but I promise the executives will see a little bit of karma later in the story. Just hang on. All right? You ready for the next CEO?
Yeah.
Corporate gossip number 5. Bill Johnson. Blink and you'll miss him. So, okay, here's the new year, new CEO. At this point, let's just lean in and hire Bill Johnson, a guy who supervised a do-it-yourself upgrade at a Florida nuclear plant, which caused critical damage, and the plant had to be decommissioned.
Yeah, why? A little Chip and Joanna Gaines for you.
You know what? We keep trying to hire these smart guys who end up stupid. Why don't we hire a stupid guy and maybe he'll turn out to be smart? The company he was leading at the time was then purchased by another energy company, and he got a $44 million golden parachute. Let me ask you this. If you get $44 million for what was at the time 1 day of work at his former company, why the fuck are you working? Stop working. Stop. Please. Anyway, he's perfect. So Bill Johnson is supposed to be leading PG&E through its second bankruptcy so far this century. As part of the settlement, they have to suspend dividends and they have to agree to new oversight. So 6 months after he takes over as CEO, PG&E pulls the plugs on millions of Californians, leaving them without power for days under the guise of fire prevention. Were you there? October 2019?
October 2019, I was celebrating what was a nice 6-month anniversary with my ex-girlfriend. We were in Sonoma County in the Russian River region for wine, for all my wine connoisseurs out there. And yeah, we got evacuated. We had to drive back to San Francisco.
So here's what happened. In October 2019, there's a weather forecast, right? So we talked about what are the ingredients to a fire?
Wind,
dry conditions, and then a spark.
Right.
So they've got 2 of those 3. Dry conditions and wind. And it indicates a pretty significant risk of wildfire. And remember, in terms of the spark, PG&E at this point had done jack shit to upgrade their lines and maintain the forest that surrounded them. They were supposed to be, during this time, cutting trees. And a judge called them out a couple months before because they had paid out stock dividends instead of trimming trees. And there's this soundbite from the hearing that's just so funny to me, and we're going to act it out now. Mike is going to be the judge. I'm going to be PG&E attorney Reed Shar.
I'm not cutting you any slack. If PG&E hasn't cut the right trees, we're going to have a hearing to get to the bottom of that.
There's a lot of trees out there, and we don't have eyes on all of them.
Oh, that's a problem of your own making. A lot of money went into dividends that should have gone to your trees. Get square with the people of California who depend on you to do the job safely. Bang, bang, gavel, gavel.
Goes. Reed calls up his boss. Cancel the reservations at Nobu. So yeah, rather than trimming trees, they're paying out dividends.
So the trimming of the trees, there's an interesting piece on this. Literally millions of trees. Pretty much every tree in California is suffering from the drought. So PG&E, rather than, hire experts and pull people on full time to trim the trees, they contracted out. They tried to prioritize the trimming by going for the highest risk trees. I don't even know how they do that. But the contractor was always behind schedule, underperforming, and missing trees.
There was some, I didn't even include it, but there was some corruption scandal with some of the contractors they were using.
Oh, it was like mafia, mob type stuff?
Something, I don't remember. So I had to cut a lot out of this episode. This is just the juiciest stuff. So, okay, so back to the wildfire conditions, right? We've got lots of wind. We've got lots of dead trees. And PG&E is like, fuck. Oh, shit. Did you upgrade those wires?
What wires?
I didn't either. Shit. I guess our only other option is we've got to shut off power. So they turn off the power, but surprise, surprise, they didn't prepare anybody for that either. They didn't have the technology to turn off specific lines. They just went full on blackout. And they didn't tell anybody. And there's this amazing expose by the New York Times. The headline is, "This did not go well," inside PG&E's blackout control room. Here's a quote from that article describing the day of the blackout. "Things quickly began going wrong. PG&E's communications and computer systems faltered, and its website went down as customers tried to find out whether they would be cut off or spared. As the company struggled to tell people what areas would be affected and when, chaos and confusion unspooled outside. Roads and businesses went dark without warning. Nursing homes and other critical services scrambled to find backup power, and even government agencies calling the company were put on hold for hours."
Yeah, I remember this because all the restaurants were closed when we were up there, and the Safeways were completely closed too. And we went into a Safeway and they were freaking out on what was going to happen to all the freezer goods and everything. It was wild. So nobody had planned for this. Nobody had dry ice to keep things cold, things like that.
Imagine if you're a medically fragile person, you're on oxygen, you're on a fucking, I don't know, some type of pump for your body, you're on a ventilator?
Yeah, but what about me? I was trying to pull together a nice charcuterie for me and my lady. And the cheese was sour.
Yeah, it's true. You should file a claim. In a hearing, the president of the California Public Utilities Commission said she was astonished at PG&E's lack of modern technology and services. I don't know why she'd be astonished. Like, read a fucking book. "This is not hard," she says. "You guys have failed on so many levels on pretty simple stuff. You need to get there now, not at the end of the year, now." These people keep screaming that these executives are doing a bad job. They're dumb. They don't get it. Please, somebody get us a better executive. And they're just like, how about $12 million? So here's what Bill Johnson had to say about the blackout that he prepared nobody for. He says, "We did not deliver on our commitments this time. We were not prepared to manage the operational event." And they made him write that over 200 times on a blackboard. Yeah. So Bill's out a little over a year after he was named CEO, and a few months later, PG&E officially emerges from bankruptcy. All right, so they go next. You remember what this reminds me of?
Next.
That
yeah, and they get their
MTV
money.
show?
They get their money at the end for how long they've been there, remember?
Yeah. Wait,
how many minutes you spent on Next?
Oh, yeah. So there was a dating show in the early aughts called Next, where a dater, like a guy, would basically be standing in a field, and then there'd be a bus full of women, and the women would come out of the bus, and like sometimes he'd immediately be like, "Next," if he didn't like the way they looked, but sometimes you'd go on a date. Oh yeah, and you'd get money. You'd get like $1 per minute.
$1 per minute.
You stayed on.
And
the
then
date.
the woman got the choice, or it was men and women, but the person got the choice. It'd be like, you can either take the money or go on the date.
Right.
I'll take the money.
Yeah.
You're not that fun anyway.
Right. This is literally corporate Next.
Yeah.
MTV's Next, PG&E. All right. Ready for the last CEO, the current CEO? Corporate gossip number 6 is Patti Poppe. New decade, same bullshit. So here's a picture of the next CEO, Patti Poppe, at a PG&E event where she brought in Elon Musk. Okay, guys, this is not like 2019. This is June 2023, this year. She brought him to a conference to brainstorm ways to meet growing electricity needs. So I don't know how we've entered into a full-blown doofusocracy. So we talked earlier about if a CEO is quoting Jack Welch, you need to run. And if a CEO invites Elon Musk to speak to you in your company, burn down the whole building.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to, this entire company, this really says it all. Imagine you're working at PG&E. Your company has now pleaded guilty to 84 counts of manslaughter. You've just come out of bankruptcy twice. And you find out through the news that your CEO is making $51 million for her first year on the job. And she sends out an email to all PG&E corporate employees. And she says, "Team, Over the past few days, you may have seen news stories about my pay that were disclosed as part of our normal annual reporting. These stories have been focused on a big dollar number without any background or context. And so it's important to me that you have the whole picture. The first thing to know is that my pay as CEO of PG&E is determined by our board of directors based on the review of other utilities of our general size and complexity. The board even uses an independent expert to help them. And as we know from the last episode, guys, this independent expert, compensation consultants, like McKinsey, for example, are complete bullshit and are only created to inflate CEO pay. Anyway, back to her email. My pay is actually at the median of this review. And in fact, my annual compensation for 2021 is about $12 million. So about in the middle of the pack.
Slightly below.
Slightly below, actually. The second thing to know is most of the $51 million number we reported, and the press focused on so heavily, relates to compensation I earned at the last company that I worked at. At the time I left, I had a significant amount of this pay, about $40 million, coming to me in the form of stock and other incentives. And so because that compensation would be forfeited when I changed jobs, the PG&E board of directors provided me with a one-time payment to make up for what I was losing. While I love PG&E, I wasn't willing to sacrifice multiple years of pay at my former company to come here. I hope you can understand. So you're being paid $51 million, but it's actually $12 million. No, it's not, Patti. It's $51 million. That is paid to you instead of trimming trees, instead of paying victims, instead of providing a better service to customers. And also the end line. I hope you can understand, you dum-dums.
There's an interesting theme here, which you
accuse me of being paid $51 million. I'll be Patti.
You're being paid $51 million?
Nuh-uh.
Really? I see.
This is a theme where CEOs rate themselves among other CEOs within an industry, right? Where they're like, oh, well, I'm slightly below. Carlos Ghosn uses this, and he's like, well, if you look at my results and where I am in the industry, I'm actually underpaid. It doesn't fucking matter in terms of relativity. Yeah. You're still fucking high.
Yeah, yes. It's crazy. Like, I don't give a shit.
Well, relative to other people, relative to my other people who make my money, I'm not paid well at all.
Yes. Have you seen the yachts in the Malibu Marina recently? Mine's like the third biggest. So, like, give me a break.
Do you know how much fractional ownership of a jet costs these days? Do you know how much I have to donate to bullshit causes to be invited to Michael Rubin's white party?
It's a lot, and I need to be compensated for that. So,
but you wouldn't understand. Let me explain this to you in a way that you can understand. I'm compensated in both base and bonus.
The other thing I need to explain to you is I'm taxed at, what's my tax rate? 2%? Oh, well, I pay a lot to the government.
I'm sure you can understand that I wouldn't want to leave my other company and not be compensated the correct amount.
Right. You get it. Yeah. How much premium diesel do you put in your G-Wagon every day?
Ask me again, do I make $51 million?
You make $51 million.
You make $51 million. That's what you sound like.
She should have just been like that. She should have said that. Oh, that's so funny.
What she should have said this. She should have said, fuck you, money please.
Money please.
Money please.
Anyway, on top of the fact that, like you said, right? Like, she can't use her relative pay as an indication for why it's justified that she's making $51 million. On top of that, allegedly at the same time, they're so short-staffed they can't connect new housing developments on time. They're raising rates on customers. It just feels really out of touch. Like, the math just isn't mathing. Either way, Poppy's sign-on bonus cleared the same day as a massive Dixie fire burned almost 1 million acres in Northern California, destroying 1,300 buildings and killing a person. The cause? Let me guess. A tree came into contact with the PG&E power line. Now, I want you to keep the following quote in mind because it's going to come up in a bit. So here's the quote. This tree, And this is PG&E's response. So PG&E, in response to their equipment falling and starting another fire, says this tree was one of more than 8 million trees within strike distance to PG&E lines. Regardless, we will continue to be tenacious in our efforts to stop fire ignitions from our equipment and to ensure that everyone and everything is always safe. Kind of reminds me of Michael Scott, doesn't it? In terms of this Dixie fire, for what it's worth, because of outdated software and short staffing, no doubt because they funneled the budget that they were going to spend on hiring people and upgrading their machinery and their software to Patti Poppe's paycheck, it took PG&E 9.5 hours to get to the scene of the fire. And if you know from that documentary, these things can like explode like that. Okay, so here's the POV. You're Patti Poppe, and I'm sending you off with the following instructions. Trim more trees, hire more people.
Got it, boss.
Okay, so here she goes. Dun, 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 dun. She goes, okay, trim more trees, hire more people. Trim more trees, hire more people. Trim more people, hire more trees. Trim more people, don't cut trees. Got it. Trim more people, don't cut trees.
Got it, boss.
And so what does she do? December 2022, right as fire prevention season is getting underway, she announces that thousands of employees will be laid off in the following jobs: vegetation management inspectors, tree trimmers, electrical linemen, and pole testers. The literal jobs responsible for wildfire mitigation.
They can be offshored. It's fine. They don't need to be in California. We can do that in the metaverse.
That's right. Then the following summer, PG&E announced that it would be scrapping its tree trimming program. This time they said that they were going to divert those resources to upgrade power lines with a setting that shuts them off in less than a second if a tree comes in contact with them. But last time they cut tree trimming budget, it went straight to dividends, so I won't hold my breath. I'm telling you, paying somebody $50 million a year can cause brain rot. They need to start studying the brains of people who are paid more than, I don't know, $10 million a year. Because listen to what Patti Poppe decides to do next. So back in 2020, there was another PG&E caused fire that we didn't even get into yet, called the Zog Fire. It burned 57,000 acres, it destroyed 204 buildings, and it killed 4 people. There were a number of civil lawsuits filed against PG&E, but they were also criminally indicted by Shasta County for 11 counts of felony involuntary manslaughter. And they were scheduled to be arraigned. They were scheduled to be arraigned on February 15th, 2023. On February 14th, the eve of the arraignment, also Valentine's Day, Patti Poppe sends out a corporate Valentine's Day video with Poppe and the other PG&E executives lip syncing to the song "Love Will Keep Us Together." Here's a still of Patti Poppe.
It's giving.
Oh, here it is.
It's giving the celebrities singing that song during COVID.
Oh my God! It's giving "Imagine" by Gal Gadot.
It's also giving Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis' apology video.
Love will keep us together. Think of me, babe, whenever.
Love will keep us together. Sorry we killed your grandma. Here were the victims, the 4 counts of manslaughter that PG&E was meant to plead guilty to killing the day after this video was released. One very brave PG&E employee recorded the video and posted it to Twitter, and the blowback to PG&E was pretty predictable. Here's Susie Booley, the grandmother of Fayla McLeod, who was an 8-year-old who died in the fire. She said, "Love is forever and our family is broken. The video is very insensitive." PG&E workers told ABC 10, who reported on this story, that they felt sick while watching the Valentine's Day music video. They don't understand why the company spent the resources to make it. It's a full-on production, one employee said. PG&E employees are told to watch expenses than this. And guess what? Like her predecessor, however many years, 10 years before her, Poppe did not attend the arraignment the next day. And ultimately, the district attorney dropped the charges in June. and agreed to a $50 million settlement with PG&E, though there's pretty significant pushback from the victims over that extremely small settlement. Okay, so you guys have made it through, and I'm sure you're thinking like, God, this has been really tough to hear all these CEOs continue to get rewarded at the expense of victims. Well, I actually do have some good news. About a year ago, a lawsuit was filed by the PG&E Fire Victims Trust that alleges that former officers and board members neglected their duty to ensure the utilities equipment wouldn't kill people. Remember, as part of the bankruptcy settlement, PG&E granted victims the right to go after the C-suite for decisions that they had made that caused these destructive wildfires. We haven't covered every single fire in this episode, but just for reference, since 2017, that's what, 6 years?
6.
PG&E has been responsible for 30 fires, destroyed 23,000 homes, killed 100 people. So when these victims are going after executives, it's going to be Tony Early, who was CEO from 2011 to 2017, and Geisha Williams, who was CEO from 2017 to 2019, and potentially Bill Johnson, but he was barely there. So they file a lawsuit, and as a result of this lawsuit, get this, Geisha Williams and Tony Early together will pay $117 million to the trust. Now, I did a back of the napkin calculation based on data from salary.com, which might not be exhaustive, but I found together that they made only $93 million between 2011 and 2019. So I'm not sure if this payout is actually covered by their insurance or what. Maybe they received backdated options, so their net worth is higher. I don't know. Either way. Money, please. Are you ready to move to the takeaways?
Yeah, I've got some good ones.
All right, you want me to start?
Go ahead.
So if you're following the Hawaiian Electric story, you'll notice a lot of similarities between these two companies. Basically, a ton of cost cutting and negligence that caused this massive destruction. So I think lawsuits will be interesting to play out. And I think they'll absolutely use some of these PG&E lawsuits as a template. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, and we didn't cover in this story, but is whistleblowers. So whistleblowers in the future could be huge in terms of preventing wildfires. Think about it. PG&E has 26,000 employees. Somebody has to know when these wires or these pipelines are not being maintained. But the problem is there is no federal protections for electric grid employees for whistleblowing. In most other organizations, it would be illegal to fire a whistleblower. But for these publicly owned utilities, they can fire them. There's a story of a veteran lineman, Todd Hearn, who was brave and attempted to blow the whistle on the line that started the campfire before it did. But he was fired by PG&E for that. And he has no recourse. It's legal, which is crazy, especially in a state like California. So in March 2020, Senator Grassley from Iowa and Senator Markey from Mass introduced a bill to strengthen whistleblower protections for electric grid workers. But according to my research, it was introduced to Congress on March 12th, 2020. So obviously it got derailed. If you're in one of those states, though, you should write to them to pick up the legislation.
I've got some more whistleblowers here that I'd like to call out. Will Abrams, who was one of nearly 70,000 wildfire victims. The small guy, you think you can do nothing, right? Abrams was outspoken in his disdain for the PG&E settlement. He consistently called out issues with the deal, mainly that it was 50% funded by PG&E stock. He went through all the bankruptcy stuff, showed up to court every day, stated his claim, did everything, has been very outspoken.
So he's like modern day Aaron Brockovich?
In modern day Aaron Brockovich. Another is Michael Ramsey, who was the Butte County DA who successfully prosecuted PG&E for 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the campfire. So that was huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, as we discussed the issues and struggles with holding an organization and corporation accountable for these things, it's very difficult. Mike Weissman, who has a really interesting story. He was a pipeline union member who claims in a suit against PG&E, officials held him overnight in a hotel and ordered him to have psychiatric evaluations after he complained about safety violations at several sites. I have a San Diego Union Tribune story that I'll link as well.
Wait. You need to say that again.
Mike Weissman, a pipeline union member, claims through a suit he has against PG&E that officials held him overnight in a hotel and ordered him to have a psychiatric evaluation after he complained about safety violations at several sites.
So literally, he complained about probably accurate and valid safety valuations, and PG&E officials said, you're actually fucking crazy and you need mental help.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So what happened to him? Do you know?
He's
suing them?
He's suing them, so there's not a whole lot that can be said. I'm sure it'll come out.
Wow. That is insane. That's next level gaslighting.
Yeah, and then we've got Alice Stebbins, who's one of the good ones at CPUC. She's the executive director. She said in a letter to the 5 commissioners who govern the agency that she was being retaliated against for trying to clean up a broken CPUC.
What's a CPUC?
CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission.
Oh, okay.
So those are some other, lots of whistleblowers, but those are the ones that stand out to me and warrant another explanation. I have some takeaways. So I think there's listeners out there who are like, I'm not in California. I'm good, right? I'm not in Hawaii, or I'm not on the West Coast. Wildfires don't affect me. I'm sure that's exactly what most people in Texas were thinking when they saw frozen temperatures and everything failed there.
And also, Northern California didn't used to be at risk of wildfire. Like, for a long time, it was really Southern California that they would put a lot of these regulations around tree trimming and whatnot, because they thought that Northern California was wet enough to handle it, but it's not anymore.
Right. Okay, so then the next thing I have is, what's the solution, right? So what they're working on now is burying all the power lines. So anything new that goes in should be buried. But again, this costs more money, no additional money back to the company.
Well, I know that PG&E did just apply for a $7 billion grant as part of the Infrastructure Act to bury power lines, which I think is just ironic. Like, it's fucked up ultimately that taxpayers have to foot the bill for these fire prevention efforts that should have been taken on by the company themselves. Like, had you done that years ago, I haven't done the math, but burying all these lines compared to what, $40-50 billion in fines? I mean, I guess insurance pays for the fines. Maybe that's how they're doing the math, but it just doesn't make sense to me that it wouldn't have been more cost effective to bury the lines in the first place. Yeah. Not to mention the human toll that could have been avoided.
Right. Well, they didn't, they didn't necessarily have the machinery to bury these lines in the first place in 1920.
No, I'm talking like 1990.
Oh, got it. Okay. Here's my final question that I'll pose, right? Okay. Are public utilities a better option? If it's not privatized, does a public utility have your customer's interest and value in mind, right? Like, if you're in the community, I don't know. Public works, not necessarily run the best, but
at least they have some skin in the game.
Exactly.
Do you know where the CEO I'd be curious. Can you look up where Patti Poppe lives? If she lives in.
What I know about San Francisco, I would guess that she lives in Pack Heights or Laurel Heights, which is a part of.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a better option than what we have now. At least we need to invest in stronger regulation, and we need to ensure that the folks who are running these, like California Public Utilities Commission, are not just as corrupt as the CEOs who run the companies. Because I didn't even get into it, but the corruption at CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission, is just as bad. I mean, they've had a number of commissioners step down in shame after a scandal. So I don't know. I think it's just, frankly, that a lot of non-competent people are doing both jobs.
She lives, this got to be her. She lives in a 5,800 square foot Lafayette, California, 5-bed, 5-bath.
Where's Lafayette, California?
It's in the East Bay.
All right. Are you ready to wrap it?
Hold on. I'm getting oh, wow. Wow. Talk about McMansion hell.
Let me see.
I got a street view. Look at those roof lines.
Damn, that's crazy. All right.
And a pool, nonetheless, in a drought?
In these conditions. Yeah, it's kind of ironic that she has a pool, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a drought. All right. Are you ready to wrap it?
Let's wrap.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. If you want to support the pod, you can do so by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link in our show notes. To follow along with the links and the research, you can find the link to the Substack in the show notes, and you can find our bookshop.org storefront, which had the book that Adam read for this episode, which was
California Burning by Catherine Blunt.
And make sure to follow us on YouTube, follow us on TikTok, and on Instagram now, where we have lots of other goodies. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast. And we'll see you next week. Bye.